I threw out all the old visuals and remade them from scratch. The new look has a more mystical bluish ghost cave atmosphere with ghastly enemies. The cave once again feels more uniform, similar to the first version, but this time I added outlines to make it easier to distinguish the shapes on screen. And along with the new art style, I was also bored of the darkness being completely black, so I made it into this swirling void that seems never ending to the player, unless something in the environment makes a sound and it gets revealed. The first iteration used particles which were spawned all around the player, and then the particles would get masked out based on which parts of the cave were revealed to the player. It looked good if the player was standing still, but as soon as the player walked around, it created a disorienting parallax effect. The way the swirling void effect works, if you remember in the last video, I explained that the whole sonar reveal system uses runtime vertex painting. And what that does is it sets the metallic values for all of the revealed materials to 1. And so with that, the player can now have a scene capture component, which has a post-processing material on it, that only looks at the metallic values in the scene, which then can be saved on a render target, giving us this black and white cutout mask of the scene. And the swirling void is just a sphere that's attached to the player's head. So now we can set the sphere's opacity to be the black and white mask cutout that we get from the scene capture. With the visual style changing so often for my game, I had to make a new Steam page. And the Steam page has a very nice wishlist button that you should click. At first, I went over to Fiverr to find an artist. Since in the beginning I knew that I would change the art style later on, I didn't want anything super fancy for the first thumbnail of my game. So I found a relatively cheap artist to make something. And man, did they deliver. For a small price of 50 euros, he made me this beautiful piece of art. And while not quite satisfied with the results, I found another artist on Fiverr to do another commission. And this one was for a staggering 200 euros. And we got 4 different art styles in the same piece with like non-translucent backgrounds. And the main character isn't even holding the whip in his hand. Obviously, I was scammed on Fiverr twice in a row. But regardless of that, my friend who is an artist finally had some free time, and so he was able to actually make the Steam art for me. This was the very first art that he made when I had just launched the Steam page. But now for the newest update, this is what he made. And I am so happy with this. This looks so good. In my game, every sound that gets spawned is its own actor that manages the sound that gets spawned, how the particles should look, and how it should reveal the environment that it overlaps with. Now, normally what a developer would do is instead of spawning these actor sounds and destroying them when they're finished, would be to make an object pool out of them. Now, an object pool is when the game pre-spawns all of the actors or game objects that you would need, and then just enables them when they're needed, and then disables them when they're no longer needed, and just puts them away to the side, instead of destroying them. This is better for performance, because spawning and destroying entire objects is way more expensive than just enabling and disabling them. But for some reason, this was the cause of the bug when the cave wouldn't be revealed by the sounds. But if the sounds were just spawned in directly into the level, they would work 100% of the time. So for me trying to be the good programmer and using a well-established optimization technique caused my game to have a critical bug. So now most of the sound actors are directly spawned in when they're needed, and they are just fully destroyed when they're done. I still have very few cases where I'm reusing the same sound actors, like for these water droplets. But I have noticed that in some playtests, those water droplets don't always reveal the cave. Another instance when the cave wouldn't be revealed is when the cave rooms would be loaded or unloaded as the player moves through the level. The cave would stay hidden regardless of what sound gets spawned in the cave. But the whole cave would be revealed as soon as the player would move their whip across to reveal the cave. And then it was as if the cave just woke up. I just made these sphere actors that move whenever the cave is loaded in, and they are directly overlapping with these tiny spikes that I extruded from each cave mesh and hid them under piles of rock. So any rock pile you see in the level, there is definitely a moving sphere underneath it, keeping the game from breaking. I've developed a specific workflow for making levels. Before Crack in the Dark was even a demo on Steam, I made levels in VR using Gravity Sketch. Because it allowed you to draw in 3D, it was very easy to make sketches of levels. And then I would place every polygon by hand, like you would in any other 3D software. It seemed more interesting and more fun to do it in VR. But later I figured out that it was just far easier to do it in Blender instead. So what I do now is I go to whataboo.github.io, and it has a cave generator that I guess is used for D&D. And I'll set the tags that I want, and I'll just go through all of the different caves that it gives me until I find something that looks interesting. And then I'll save that image, I'll go into Blender, I'll place it as a background, and then I'll probably also do some sketching on top of it to, like, add extra walls, extra passageways, what to block out, or if I just want to use a specific room of the cave, and then I use a pen tool to trace it all out, then I extrude it, and you'll see that it has a very bad topology. So I export it as an OBJ, and I move it over to Instant Mesh. This is a very nice retopology tool, which will take my shitty OBJ from Blender and give me a new mesh, which has much better topology for my cave. I don't think this tool would work for complex characters, but for a cave that has no right or wrong answer of how it should look, this is great. This saves a lot of time. And then I move back into Blender with the new mesh. And I've also made this 3D ruler in Unreal Engine, which tells me how far the player can jump, what gaps can he clear, what ledges can he climb, how far his whip will reach. So I can make all the adjustments and make sure that the cave will now be actually playable. And also, since the cave is currently very flat, I'll also just move everything around a bit, add just more 3D depth to the whole cave. Now when I'm happy with all that, I'll move it over to Unreal Engine. And now in Unreal Engine, I will use the built-in sculpting tool to move everything around more, give even more detail to the cave walls and the floor, smooth anything out that needs smoothing, and I'll adjust any platforming issues so the player can actually clear the level. Then I'll place in all of the door frames, and then I'll divide each cave room into their own separate sub-level, and then the rock piles get added along with the hidden spheres that I talked about, and then finally the enemies and the decorations get placed. Anytime a game saves your progression, it can only save basic values. That means numbers and names. In my game, anything that needs to be saved has an ID attached to them. An ID will be generated for every object using a data table that has the type name of the object, so for instance, fireplace, and an integer value, which in this case is 15. And then the second part of the ID will be whatever number is at the end of the name for that specific actor instance. So for example, this fireplace will always have an ID of 151. In other cases, health deposits will always start with 30. So in this case, this health deposit will be 301. This way the game will always have the same ID for every object instance. And when the game needs to load in data, it'll know exactly about what state to set for what specific object. In the current demo, I've left out a specific item that helps the player navigate the caves more. I call it Resonite. It's basically like a glow stick that just sticks to walls and it will constantly pulsate with sound, so you can always see it, and that way you can mark where you've been. I didn't include it in the new demo version because I don't think it fits the current flow of the game. And I think if the players receive markers that they can place in the caves, then the labyrinth of the cave needs to be more complex. Otherwise, it will be too easy to navigate the caves. Currently, the roadmap for the game is to make everything polished enough for Steam Next Fest that is happening in February. I still have a few mechanics I want to add before that, and game feel improvements. There are still some visual fixes I want to do, so be sure to follow this channel so you can see the updated shorts. And then shortly after Steam Next Fest, have the game released. I'm not sure if it's going to be early access or full release yet, but we'll see after that.